If I can have your attention, we will call this meeting to order. This is the March 8, 2012 meeting of the Jefferson City Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Ralph Robinette. I am the chairman and will chair the meeting. We will now introduce our commissioners and staff, starting with Michael.
Mike Lester.
Jack Deacon.
Dave Nunn.
Ann Strophen.
Dale Vaughn.
Chris Yarnell.
Dean Dutoy.
Scott Stacy.
Eric Barron.
It's on. It's on.
City Code authorizes 9 regular members and 3 alternates. Alternates are designated to vote upon the absence or disqualification of any regular members. A quorum of 5 members or alternates is necessary to conduct business. I hereby declare that a quorum is present. Regular members absent tonight are Chris Jordan and Bob George. Therefore, our alternates can vote this evening, and that includes you, Dale. Because we do not have any cases tonight, we will waive the reading of the procedural matters. You have the agenda in front of you. The chair at this time would move for a motion to adopt the agenda as you have it printed before you.
So moved. Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Agenda is adopted. You also have in your packet the minutes from the February 9th, 2012 meeting. If you'd like just a few moments to look over those, I will let you do so. While you're looking at those, our director, Ms. McMillan, just came in. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Ms. McMillan.
Janice McMillan.
Okay, thank you. Are there any corrections or revisions to the minutes as you have them presented before you? Hearing or seeing none, Chair will entertain a motion to approve them as you have them.
Move to approve the amendment or the minutes.
All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The minutes are accepted. You have a piece of correspondence before you from Central Missouri Professional Services. I think it's self-explanatory. If you have any questions, you can talk to the staff about that a little bit later. New business. Seeing none. Miscellaneous reports. Seeing none, we will now go to other business. Eric.
Still not? Yes, it is? Okay. I figured I'd take the stand on this one. This evening, passed out to you is a fairly lengthy staff report touching on the 7 items that staff are looking at possible zoning code amendments. What we're looking for this evening from you is any initial feedback and, of course, to introduce these topics to you so that you can think about them and give us any feedback after the meeting via email or telephone, and possibly even give us some direction in terms of what of the items might be in a position to be brought forward as actual zoning code amendments for next month. Just to jump right in, starting at the top of the list, fences. Currently, the zoning code regulations regarding fences do not have any type of design standards. So a person is literally free to construct their fence out of a variety of different materials. The fence regulations are really geared toward height. And of course, as staff, we do our best to ensure that fences are constructed in as best a manner as possible. But the codes sometimes fail to back us up in some of these things. What we are looking for is to establish some design standards, and I have several examples from other cities listed to give you an idea on what other cities do. And then also to modify some of the height requirements, allowances, which I'll go over here real quick. Okay. The main thing really is the design standards. If looking at some of the examples from other cities, without reading through all of them, I kind of wanted to bring attention to Lee's Summit. They have height requirements that are a little bit different than ours, but they only allow wood, vinyl, or steel, masonry, wrought iron, typical fencing materials for their construction. And then they also require that fences, that the finished side of fences face outward from the property. That sometimes comes up, and sadly sometimes comes up in neighbor to neighbor disputes where one neighbor is constructing a fence and wants it to look as good as possible from their point of view. And of course, then the other neighbor has this fence right up on their property line that sometimes with the post side facing them. It's fairly typical for other cities to that have design standards to require posts to be on the inside. And I was wondering what you all thought of that. If you have any thoughts. Yes.
Just haven't read through all these, and I would have sworn we had design standards. I know we talked about it at one point, but that aside, I think that Lee Summit sounds pretty good, because I can think of instances where there have been some problems, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of them. So
There are buffer yard standards that have fence standards. Those are probably the ones you're thinking of.
I thought at one time when we redid the zoning ordinance,
Yes.
we talked about that.
Mhm.
Maybe they just went by the wayside.
Are we discussing just like the materials of the fence, or are we talking about heights and what it says here in Lee Summit? Like
The height, I can touch on that a little bit as well. It's currently our regulations allow for in residential zones. Let me touch on residential zones first. Allow for a 4-foot tall fence anywhere on the property, as long as it's on the property. And then a 6-foot tall fence for anywhere that is behind the front plane of the building. Now, the way our zoning code interprets front yards, if you're on a corner lot, you have 2 front yards. If you're on what we call a through lot or a double frontage lot, you also have 2 front yards. The corner lots, it seems pretty clear to me that the 4-foot standard behind, keeping 6-foot tall fences away from the road is a pretty relevant design guideline. It's the through lots or the double frontage lots that tend to create an issue, and there's several. Lee Summit in particular, which allows references double frontage lots. Let me give an example of what a double frontage lot is. If you drive along Ellis Boulevard, going from west to east, and you look off on your left, there's a lot of backyards. And there's several other roads in Jefferson City where you're driving on the road and you look and there's people's backyards face the road. Okay, that's their house actually fronts on a different road on a local street, but their backyard faces that arterial street. Well, the way our zoning code is interpreted today, they'd be limited to a 4-foot tall fence because the back of their lot is considered a front yard. It faces a road. Having an allowance for a taller fence for cases like that seems to be pretty reasonable and pretty standard. But at the same time, a corner lot where the house faces one street and the side yard is facing the other street, we have had requests where people wanted to put 6-foot tall fences in that side yard. I literally had someone call me up just 30 minutes ago or about an hour ago asking that very question. And having a 6-foot tall fence in a side yard tends to cause problems in terms of the neighbor immediately behind them. Their view can be affected. It results in a fence right up against the road, a very tall fence, things like that. I hope I kind of
Yeah.
elaborated on that.
What about a
effectively.
fence that goes down the middle of two driveways, like a shared driveway? Would it have to be could you put a 4 feet?
Well, if it's behind the building, it can be 6 foot tall.
Okay.
So
Behind the front of the building.
Yeah,
But but you could have a 4-foot fence in between two shared driveways up to a certain point.
yes,
Okay.
up to the front plane of the buildings,
Okay.
and then 6 foot
How
beyond
close
that.
can you get to the road, though?
As far as your property goes, up to the right-of-way line with the 4 foot tall fence.
The right away. Okay.
Yeah.
Eric,
Yes.
on the fences, I do know that Lee Summit doesn't have a lot of farmland anymore. They grow houses up there, but Jefferson City does have a lot of farmland that's in the city, so I would really caution you not to define this thing so narrowly where we adversely affect the farmers. And when I look in here, I don't think you've considered any farm fences. So before you start defining this, make those exceptions for those farm operations that are in the city and the existing fences that are already out there.
Certainly. There in the zoning code, there is some reference to it, but we'll take a second look at that. Any other comments?
I was just going to elaborate on what Ralph said, because I know a lot of times things are grandfathered in and the agricultural land is down to, but once you start changing things, they're no longer grandfathered in. You go from northern wire to barbed wire or vice versa, technically it's no longer grandfathered in. So, there's a lot, even a lot of land in town, rural things,
Mhm.
even electric law.
Certainly. I think that probably the item here that probably needs the most attention is the one on the posts, on whether to have them require them to be on the inside of the fence. Does anyone have any other comments on that?
I think that's probably the best way to go. But I have a comment that comes from a whole different perspective than everybody's talked about, Eric. From a traffic point of view, some of the materials that you've talked about may cause issues with your sight distance, especially on your corner lots. You may want to think about that.
Issues with who? I'm sorry.
Sight distance,
Sight distance.
being able to see around the corner.
Yeah, we do have that fences are still required to stay out of the sight triangle if they're going to be in it.
Okay, well,
and that is
I
something.
missed that someplace, I guess.
Okay, yeah, it's kind of a separate section of the zoning code, but that is something that our inspectors pay attention to.
Okay, and it's a little bit different, but the fence that Midwest Brick and Block has over on East McCarty Street, that ornamental decorative fence that's not 4 foot tall,
Yes.
is that an issue?
That was a PUD plan. That is a very specific thing contained within the PUD plan, so it's kind of
But
separate from the
would
normal.
that then not be allowable unless it was specifically?
Yeah, that was a very specific situation in a normal zoning district. Well, they'd still have to meet buffer yard requirements, so there's still a little bit of an area for that
and I
fence
would
to
say
be
too,
allowable.
in the crafting of the actual language, we can write those exceptions in there, exceptions for agriculture, exceptions for fencing or walls that are approved by Planning and Zoning Commission as part of a PUD plan. Yeah, it's terrific. It's very nice, very attractive.
Okay.
But that's very good to think about those exceptions that should be written in the code.
Anything else? Moving on to the next item. This is another item that comes up quite routinely is garages. First, let me tell you what is allowed in terms of garages today. A person who owns a single family house can construct a garage, and the maximum size of the garage is based on the amount of lot area that they have. For an extremely small lot, up to or smaller than 6,000 square feet, they're allowed a 600 square foot garage, usually a 6,000 square foot lot. Most of those are kind of in the older sections of the city. And then for each 3,000 square feet of lot area in excess of 6,000, you get an extra 200 square feet of garage area, up to a maximum of 1,000 square feet of garage area. And that's the item that I think is really what we're trying to focus on. Is oftentimes there are property owners who want to build garages that exceed that maximum of 1,000 square feet. And sometimes these property owners own very large lots or very large even tracts of land and are still held to this 1,000 square foot maximum. You'll see that I've listed 3 separate variances that people have applied for fairly recently, 2 of them just within the last year, from that 1,000 square foot maximum. Given the reliance on automobiles, usually it's to store extra automobiles today, and just the desire to have larger garages where they have the property to really allow for that. We think that an increase in the maximum size is probably warranted. The recommendation is kind of based on acreage down there at the bottom, is basically allowing them up to 1,250 square feet of garage if they have a half acre lot, and then up to 1,500 if they have an acre or more. If you look at some of the other cities, you'll see that it's kind of, it seems like every city regulates the size of their garage different, at least of the 5 that I chose for examples here. Lee Summit is kind of the one that I was looking at for this one. It looks to be almost the same as ours in terms of having a maximum of 1,000 square feet, but they allow for people who have 4 acres or more to have double that. Well, there aren't a whole lot of 4-acre lots in our town, but there are a lot that are half acre or an acre. I was wondering if you have any thoughts or any experience on that.
And I know the heading here says detached garages, but does it apply to attached garages as well?
No, the attached garage is just considered part of the primary structure.
So it could be as big as you wanted it if it was attached.
Yes, as long as you meet all your other setback and coverage requirements.
Eric, at what point is it a detached garage or a standalone storage shed? What constitutes a garage? What's a storage shed?
Well, technically, it's the garage door, but
Garage door have to go up, or can it swing out?
Exactly. There's all sorts of things that property owners have brought to us in terms, and I think typically they're processed under what's allowed for a garage. So there's a separate allowance for a storage building. It's very minimal. If I recall off the top of my head, I think it's 224 square feet. That's allowed for a storage building, and that's generally one of a small storage shed that sometimes a lot of people buy out at Lowe's.
Is that main floor square footage? Because I know some people have thought about putting a mother-in-law apartment or just another sleeping room above the garage.
Yeah.
Can you count that second floor?
Actually, something like that really is not permitted in terms of yeah.
You're supposed to have one floor in the garage, and that's the square footage on the bottom floor. You can put a loft up there for storage. That's not counted.
Yeah, I think that becomes a separate kind of living quarter sometimes. But the regulation is based on square footage. So if someone was wanting to build a 2-story, I think we would have to interpret that as being, 500 square foot on each floor. So that's what they'd be held at today. So.
What about placement of the garage?
Right now, their process. I mean, they're an accessory structure, So they're allowed, up to 5 feet from the side property line if they're at least 60 feet from the front. They're allowed to be in the backyard. They're required to be at least 10 feet away from the primary, from the house. We haven't had a whole lot of issues with the placement. It's usually the size that's.
I think one of the main points in regulating the size of an accessory structure is to ensure that it remains subordinate to the primary structure, and whether or not you count the other accessory structures that might be on a property, how do you factor those in the total square feet or floor area or whatever. So all of those are very pertinent considerations, I think, to this question. So it can get a little involved because we do allow more than one accessory structure on a lot. We might want to look at that a little bit just to ensure that the structures remain subordinate to the primary structure.
Well, and I think that's a good point, because technically you could have a garage that's bigger than your residence.
No, there is some language in there that keeps that from happening, but you could have it the same size minus 1 foot. Yeah.
We even say I think it would be good to have it so that it's some kind of like Springfield or Blue Springs, where there's some, so that you do like Janice mentioned, where you're making sure that it's not even close to being the same size as your.
I get a little scared when looking at percentage-based allowances.
Yeah,
so.
but something so that you keep it from.
Mm-hmm. And one reason for that is sometimes people want to start businesses out of their garage, and of course, which is generally not permitted. That's as having a commercial use in a residential area, but. Sometimes their intentions are good until they realize they got a real nice big building that maybe they can use in that manner.
Going through places I can think of where the closer to the size of the main structure the garage is, usually the less well kept the property is.
Yeah, I was thinking in this vein, putting it based on acreage may be a problem, given the terrain here in Jefferson City, that you can have a lot of acreage. Well, I'm thinking about my own property where I have almost an acre, but there's probably only 1/10 of an acre that is really you can build on.
That can be an issue sometimes. It's. So if someone, sometimes we've seen situations similar to what you've described, where people want the garage bad enough that they engineer it, or they do what they need to the property to make it work.
Just out of curiosity, in older subdivisions, before there were restrictions, subdivision restrictions and material restrictions, is there design standards for garages too, as far as material?
No.
Build it at anything you want?
Well, let me say, if you were in a subdivision that had restrictive covenants, there could be restrictions, but so you'd have to look at those covenants. In the zoning, the zoning didn't have any.
Well, there's building regulations, so you got to meet those. Cloth is pretty flammable. I'm not sure if it'd pass.
Well, and that's a good point, because in Jefferson City's history, there were fire codes that also regulated the type of building materials you could use. So there's kind of a long history of regulation of buildings.
Proliferation of those, I guess it's a canvas type carport. Are those allowable in town? I see them in the country all the time. They're not. It's a portable carport, and I'm pretty sure the canvas roof. Is it polished? Are those allowed in town? I see them.
I guess. We might want to think about that. I mean, I guess if it's a permanent, I don't know what if you would want those in. Well, if it has a foundation and requires a building permit, that would be a permanent structure. Of course, you get the little sheds that you can buy. Those don't generally have a foundation; just have a little floor that you put those on, I guess.
No,
Well, those are good questions. I mean, what kind of structures do you want to see popping up in our community? Yeah, you can. You can regulate materials.
Yes, that is a possibility. The zoning code can, regulate building materials.
And if you could tie it to the fact that it has to have some, unfortunately you're going back to percentage, but that some part of the building has to have the same type of building exterior material as the residence.
That's actually an item that's contained in a lot of zoning codes. I kind of cherry-picked out of the zoning codes to target toward the things I'm trying to address here, but that is something that I ran across in several of them, is that if that the garage has to be built of the same type of material as the primary structure.
And maybe even a similar roof pitch, so you don't end up with that example you and I were talking about prior to the meeting.
Yep. I mean, that is certainly something we can do some more research on and look at if you're interested.
And I tend to think if there's some way to tie it to the size of the house, that if you've already got an attached garage, then somehow the detached garage, and even if you don't have an attached garage, the detached garage shouldn't be more than some percentage of the main floor square footage.
Like half.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yes.
Any other comments or suggestions? Moving on, buffer yards. And basically 3 different items on buffer yards. First, the zoning code requires buffer yards on both sides of a property line. Let me give an example of what I mean there. When a commercial property abuts an industrial property, there's and you look in our buffer yard chart, there's a requirement for a buffer yard between the commercial and industrial property. So if something builds on the commercial property, they got to put in a buffer yard. It's also the reverse requirement. So if something builds on the industrial property, they have to put in a buffer yard. So what you get is you get 2 buffer yards doing the same thing along the same property line. There's looking at examples from other cities. 4 out of 5 of my examples do not have systems that are like that. Lee's Summit, for some reason, does, and their section on buffer yards is very similar to ours right now. The second issue, our Type B buffer yard. If you recall, we have 3 types of buffer yard: A, B, and C. C being the kind of the highest level that's required between like commercial property and single-family neighborhoods, and the Type A buffer yard is well, to be quite honest, very very rarely even seen because it's such a minimal buffer yard, but is required in certain circumstances. But the Type B comes up a lot, and the Type B buffer yard has a fencing requirement. They have to put in a 3-foot tall fence. 3 foot tall, isn't going to shield a view, and best I can figure, the purpose there is to shield headlights. It seems like that would be something that needs to be done, where a parking lot might be facing, say a parking lot for an apartment complex or something facing a single family property. would seem to be a bit of a nuisance to have headlights shining across your property all the time. So, but in practice, we often have to require these 3-foot tall fences along an entire property length where it really doesn't have a whole lot of effect. Basically, we're looking at only requiring that where a parking lot is up against the property to shield the headlights. And then the third item is just kind of a general comment toward topography. I think Jeff City has some very steep land in it, and oftentimes, buffer yard requirements really, it's very difficult to craft them and take that into account. We feel that there needs to be some sort of flexibility. Right now, the flexibility is to go to the Board of Adjustment and ask for some sort of variance whenever you have a buffer yard that's up against a hillside or something that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's not shielding anything. We actually have one variance case that was to that effect out on Creek Trail, right on the corner of Creek Trail Drive and Creek Trail Place, which is just a short little cul-de-sac off of it, where the property was just right up against a hill. If they would have built I believe it was a 6-foot tall fence that they would have had been required there, you literally would have been able to look down on the other side of the fence from the neighboring property. So if you look down in the recommendations, to amend the buffer yard section so that buffer yards are only required on the more intensive zoning side of the property line. So in my industrial and commercial example, the buffer yard would only be required if the industrial site were to redevelop, as industrial is a more intensive zoning district than commercial. So if the commercial site were to redevelop, they would not be required to put anything in. They certainly could if they wanted to shield themselves from the industrial site. But and then, of course, to eliminate the 3-foot tall fence requirement except for parking lots, and to allow the department director to have some flexibility in terms of buffer yards where extreme topography kind of renders the buffer yard ineffective. Any comments or questions?
Does the department director make the recommendation as to what the buffer yard material will be made of, by type or by each individual case? What can a buffer yard be made of?
Well, there are standards in the code, so whoever develops a property could select one of those
So
one of those
the
types.
developer will bring the ideal to you for approval, then
Yes.
it comes to planning and zoning? Okay.
Any other comments?
I think the recommendation sounds pretty reasonable.
Okay. Moving on, outdoor lighting. This is an item that we have had a recent variance case on. There's a couple different items here. Our outdoor lighting standards are primarily geared toward parking lots. Of course, they apply to all outdoor lighting, but generally, lights are directed toward parking lots. Right now, to give you an example, foot candles is used kind of throughout my little write-up here, and that's how we regulate is based on a foot candle level. The foot candle level in the C2 district, which is kind of the Missouri Boulevard type development, is 4 foot candles. An average, so a new development going in along Missouri Boulevard, that has parking lot lights, can have an average of 4 foot candles across their property. Several commercial businesses have in the past requested more than that, and it's usually car lots. In fact, that's what our variance case was for. It was for Riley Chevrolet just last year, and gas station canopies. Typically, we've also had a bank with a canopy asking for a higher lighting level. Now we were able to accommodate them for the most part. I think probably not as bright as they would have liked, but for the most part, in terms of they were still underneath the average foot candle levels. But having some sort of guidance in terms of what they're allowed would be good to have located in the zoning code. If you look down, every town tends to regulate lighting in a different manner. There's all sorts of measurements you can use based on foot candles, lumens, or even wattages of the bulbs. It's really across the board, and to go through and describe it all, it takes some time to really get into it and figure out trying to compare our community to others. I've kind of looked toward Lee Summit on this one. Now they regulate based on wattage of lights, but they do have a statement in there that canopy lighting is permitted as low as a minimum of 10-foot candles and a maximum of 30-foot candles. So if you look down at my recommendation, is actually to limit it at 10-foot candles underneath a gas station canopy. Also, if you look at Columbia, I kind of look toward them for guidance as well, where they do have canopy lighting limited to 10-foot candles for. That's one issue. Another issue is in the past we have received complaints from city residents that certain commercial sites, usually big ones, have their lights on at all hours during the night, and doesn't really seem to be real necessary. Kind of a light pollution type of issue. And looking through other codes, there are many other communities that basically require half the lights to be turned off at times where their business is not open. So if you look down at the recommendation, is to allow canopy lighting and also vehicle display lots, an average of 10-foot candles. And oftentimes the car lots want more light on their cars, and there are several examples from other communities where they're permitted that. And then also, of course, for the larger parking lots that contain 4 or more light poles, kind of using Lee Summit as a guide, to require those businesses to shut off half of their lights or reduce the intensity by 50% during times when they're not open.
Well, a lot of them already, the newer sites have the capability of doing that. When Lowe's came to town, we asked them about that, and they had actually wired their site so that they could reduce the lighting. So they had anticipated being able to do that. So I think, with becoming more energy conscious, definitely. I think, a lot of businesses are interested in doing that. We could. I think we probably could. I'll talk to our law department about that. We'd have to allow a period of time for them to come into compliance, and then we'd have to monitor that. But, usually you would think something like that would be just as you suggested. It would be beneficial to the bottom line. Of course, there's always the cost of making that change. But we can pursue that with our law department to see what they would suggest.
Can you give us an example of what 10-foot candles is?
Yes. Underneath the Hy-Vee gas station canopy is 10-foot candles.
10 foot long?
No.
10-foot light?
No. Foot candle is a measure of brightness. It's the light that a candle puts out at a distance of 1 foot over a 1 square foot area, if I have that correctly. We actually have a meter that we can take out to sites and measure foot candle levels. We have done that on occasion. Apologize, don't have the numbers in front of me. Typically, car lots, the ones that are out there got more than, have more than 10-foot candles today. Of course, they're grandfathered in. A lot of sites across the city, would not meet today's, lighting standards, but they're grandfathered in. There's several gas station canopies that underneath them have levels as high as 50-foot candles, which just kind of shine like a beacon in the night. 10-foot candles, as the homework assignment, if you're driving, out on the west end by Hy-Vee and look over at the gas station there, and look at the light underneath the canopy, that would give you a really good idea of what we're looking at.
Are you opposed to the idea of having a limit at the property line versus what's inside the property?
Right now, we do have language that the light cannot go over the property line. There are several communities that, again, seem to regulate based on just that. The problem there is that just having that limit at the property line would seem to we seem that there's a lot of glare that comes off of a parking lot that wouldn't necessarily be measurable at the property line, but could still be seen for a very large distance away.
It's my understanding, though, and I'm not well versed on it, but it's my understanding that can be adjusted by the type of light used. Not necessarily the fixture, but the type of lighting unit used.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Okay. I hadn't really ran into any of that.
I just wanted, Janice brought up something of like how much does it normally cost to like change somebody from using daylight all night or lighting all night to modifying it to where it dims it? Is that something that would be expensive for the property owner?
I do not know.
So take that into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, does this outdoor lighting apply only to commercial and only to permanent lighting, or does it apply to temporary lighting in non-commercial endeavors?
It does apply. There are standards for non-commercial areas. The temporary lighting, I don't believe that there's any reference to any allowances for temporary type of lights. So,
would it apply to government-owned buildings? Would it apply to the National Guard out there?
No, our zoning code does not apply to the Missouri state government. So they're not held by our requirements.
A lot of these construction sites at night, boy, they really light it up. So is this going to apply to them also, or is there going to be a waiver for safety reasons for temporary lighting?
Yeah, I think typically construction sites are looked at a little bit different in that regard. Typically it's almost more of, it comes under other factors there.
Pavers that balloon light up that put out way more than what he's talking about.
No, I believe that for the most part this is in reference to permanent lighting. So I don't imagine that someone's Christmas display is Yeah, I don't know. It's something we can look at, though. Are there any other comments, suggestions? Authorized land uses. As we sometimes bring in front of you, modifications to the zoning matrix. The 10 pages or so that lists various uses that are allowed in what zoning districts that they're permitted, conditional uses or special exceptions in. Have basically 5 changes here. One, vocational and tech schools, business schools, etc. There's several of those in this town. Think Metro Business College, which was a recent case in front of you, Columbia College, things like that, where it's basically usually a single building. In Metro's case, there's 2 buildings, but they're kind of connected. But it's basically a small site and different from a university campus or something along those lines. But basically defining them where if they're 5 acres or less, allowing them to be located or permitted in the C1 and C2 districts. And I have some rationale listed there. Number 2, a print copy shop. Again, this is nothing that's really come up, but it would seem that print copy shops are not allowed in the C1 district right now. I think that might be a holdover from days when there's a lot more to printing and copying, and with today's technology, you really can't differentiate that use from a general retail type of use. So the recommendation there is to go ahead and permit it in the C1 district. About the only case I can think of is if a Kinko's or something were to locate in a strip mall that was zoned C1. That might come up as an issue. Number 3, the contractor and trade shops, which is a fairly common use as zoning goes. Contractors who are operating out of locations, sometimes with outdoor storage, sometimes not. But with the amount of C2 zoned property in our community, and many of our almost borderline kind of manufacturing oriented or industrial oriented types of areas, the one that immediately comes to mind is Creek Trail Drive, which is zoned C2. Even though there's a lot of uses in there that are really more geared toward what other communities might see as a manufacturing type of use. Basically, that it's a fairly common use, and as long as there's a body to look over what they have in mind and ensure that it's not going to have a large effect on neighboring properties, the Board of Adjustment in this case, seems like it's something that could fit in the C2 district. So the recommendation is to allow it with a conditional use permit in the C2 district, and that's with outdoor storage. Contractor and trade shops with only indoor operations are already allowed in the C2 district. So it's basically just allowing them to have outdoor storage if they get approval by the Board of Adjustment. Number 4, the motor vehicle wash, car washes. I'm not sure why, but they're a conditional use of the C2 district. So a car wash technically has to go in front of the Board of Adjustment to locate in our C2 district. Did a little bit of homework on this one. Out of the 9 car washes in our community, 7 of them are on property zoned C2, and the other 2 are PUD and really oriented toward highway commercial type uses. I think it should just be permitted outright. So if someone wants to build the next one, they don't have to go in front of the board. And then number 5 is an item that comes up quite a bit actually, dog grooming, and we don't have dog grooming specifically listed in our zoning matrix, and think that it's probably time to do so in terms of defining what it is and permitting it in the C1 and C2 districts as long as it's all indoors. Dog grooming, the definition would have to differentiate it from a veterinary type of service and certainly from any type of kennel. So, are there any comments or questions about any of those? Next, telecommunication towers, cell towers. We have a pretty extensive set of specific use standards in our zoning code for cell towers. The regulations are kind of messy, so I've been working with the legal department in terms of cleaning those up. To just give you an idea on what would the direction we're headed, and to get feedback in terms of if you think that this is the proper direction, we're looking at writing the regulations, and there's very few changes that we're actually proposing. Most of it's to clean it up, but towers up to 70 feet in height would be permitted outright, and towers taller than 70 feet would require a conditional use permit from the Board of Adjustment, and that all towers would have to be designed for co-location. There are several other requirements in there, such as setbacks and things like that, and buffer distances from other types of land uses, which are listed there. Basically, a tower, would have to have a big enough pieces of property that it can be set back at least 50% of the height of the tower up to 100 feet, plus another foot for every foot over 100 feet. And then buffer distances from mainly residential uses is primarily the concern there, in terms of being separated from residential uses. Any comments on that? I know that's a very short description on a very long section of our zoning code.
On your buffer distances, Eric, so like for single-family residential, it would be the lesser of the two? Is that the way it's supposed to be, 300 feet or the height of the tower?
It's actually the greater of the two.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Again, in that case, it's hard to imagine a 300-foot tower.
Right, yeah.
In fact, if the tower's more than 150 feet, there's an extra set of justification that's needed in terms of the tower company justifying why they need a tower so tall, which I did not list here. But
maybe I misunderstand. So if the tower was 70 feet, the setback wouldn't be 70 feet. It's still the way you've got it worded, I guess.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's two things. They have to. There's a setback, and then there's the buffer. So they still have to be 300 feet from anybody's house.
Even though it's a 70 foot
Yeah,
tower.
whether it's 70 foot or whether it's 100 foot. So. Any comments? Every once in a while, a cell tower ends up in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission as part of a PUD plan where one's being proposed on PUD property. And typically, we look at the this section in terms of what the board would normally look at when presenting those to you, what the Board of Adjustment would normally look at. And then my last section is in regards to parking. And you'll see I have 5 different items listed there. The top 3 really all go together. They're all dealing with restaurants and bars, very, very similar types of uses in terms of traffic and parking demand. Right now, the zoning code parking requirement for a sit-down restaurant or a sit-down bar is 1 parking space for every 3 seats in the restaurant or bar. And then for a fast food restaurant or a drive-through, a drive-through is the proper term. The parking requirement is 1 space for every 4 seats. And so as part of our plan review, we have to ask the business how many seats they're going to have in their restaurant. And they give us a number. And then after the restaurant is constructed and the parking is in place, we have to go out and count the number of seats and make sure that that it matches what they told us. And if it's if they have more seats than what they are allowed in terms of parking, literally the only way to resolve that, well, I guess you could come up with more parking somewhere, but usually it's to remove seats, to shove seats back in storage, which often promptly get put back out on the floor once we're gone. We feel that most of the other land uses in the zoning code parking requirements are regulated based on gross floor area. I feel that that's a pretty good way to determine a parking requirement for a piece of property or for a business. Many other communities do it that way. Very few communities do it based on seats. There are some that do it based on maximum occupancy, but for the top three here, the restaurant, the drive-through restaurants, and the bars, kind of look toward Columbia for guidance. And in all three cases, Columbia requires one parking space per 100 square feet gross floor area. If you look at some of the other examples, you'll see that many times, in fact, in almost all the cases, except one, I believe, the requirement is more than one parking space per 100 square feet. You look at Springfield, 1 per 80 square feet, or 1 per 70 or 75. 20 spaces per, O'Fallon requires 20 spaces outright plus 1 per 100 square feet. So Columbia looks to be on kind of the low end in terms of what they require, and I think that's probably a good place to be. The one example that's kind of contrary to everything is under restaurant for Blue Springs. One space for every 150 square feet for the first 2,500 square feet, and then 1 per 100 after that. So basically given a little bit less of a requirement for a very small restaurant. But 1 per 100 square feet seems to be almost in the middle, or even a little bit below that. That's would probably have a very large impact on development. Restaurants tend to be one of the items that are one of the most common types of development in our community. I was wondering if you have any thoughts in that regard. 1 per 3 seats. Yes.
I hate looking to Columbia for anything, but in this respect, they probably have more restaurant and bar business than we do. And if it's workable for them, it would probably be workable for us. Boy, that was hard to say.
We'll get them to bleep that out. Yes. Next one. We do not list hotels as a parking for a parking requirement. So we have to come up with one anytime a hotel is constructed in our community. We have to look toward other things. We think it needs to be listed outright. In this regard, I fortunately kind of look toward Columbia again as well. It seems pretty standard, 1 parking space per room as a requirement. Sometimes there's other uses that are attached to a hotel. Sometimes a restaurant might be attached to it, or a convention space, or some other use that is not hotel rooms. So it's important to take that into regard when coming up with a calculation. But at the same time, the people using that restaurant are typically people staying at the hotel. So requiring the parking for both uses would kind of result in an overbuild of parking. Typically, if you look at some of the examples, there's 1 per room plus some sort of allowance for employees. My thoughts on the subject are that a lot of times, especially given we're the state capital, people come in pairs in a single vehicle and with 2 separate rooms, so that 1 parking space per room might result in a little bit of more parking than is absolutely necessary. But and typically the employees aren't necessarily a whole lot of them there at nighttime. But I appreciate any thoughts anyone else might have on it.
So what's our current requirement?
We do not have it listed. Yeah.
And I think that makes sense. If you look at what occupancy rates are, you're never full, very seldom, so that still leaves room for staff. Plus, like you say, if they have additional uses. So I think that would work out pretty well.
David, that may change. If the SEC does what I think it's going to do and we can play competitively, that'll change 6 times a year. I think we'll be full.
Oh, yeah, I think there are times when several of the places are full.
Yeah.
You want us to act on these at the next meeting?
I'm curious. The bank is hardly worth mentioning, but again, Columbia requires 1 per 250 square feet.
When I was at the bank, most of the people in the drive-through.
Yeah.
They should have longer drive-through lanes or the parking area. Most people, and uptown, I mean, there's no parking uptown.
Yeah. A parking requirement of 1 per 300 might even be better.
Yeah, but I think there should be something that drive-through lanes be easily accessible.
Yeah, and we have a section for drive-through lanes, and I don't have that in front of me, but it does have certain stacking distance, how many cars need to be accommodated for a bank drive-through lane. So, are there any other comments on anything? Really, to go back to the beginning, my purpose here is to present these items to you. Getting any initial feedback from you that you can provide, and then to get you thinking about it, so that when you go out and look at the community, if anything else comes to mind, I'd appreciate a telephone call, an email, or anything in terms of what you might be thinking. But ultimately, we would like to bring these items in front of you, publish them for a public hearing, and bring them in front of you. I was wondering if you feel that we're ready to move forward on any of these in that manner.
I would rather that you take our suggestions, go back and get us a draft proposal, bring it back to the April meeting, let us look at it again, and then after we've had another month to look at it, perhaps May or June, we can go forward. Is that time frame acceptable with you, Ms. Director, and the staff, or you?
Absolutely.
Is that agreeable with the commissioners?
The one thing all of them, I think you need to look at more closely is the more expensive, because we have new organizations that allow for parking. A lot of people are using electric, a lot of people are using temporary fencing, or higher grade using temporary grade in one area than another. I think presently you're not allowed to use electric agricultural drones. I think they're only exempt from most business.
Mhm.
It's always down, we have 15, 20 acres could be residential. Actually, there's a little area, so, I know I have electric, I'm probably out of compliance, but, the other, you have a little
Anything else? Thanks for coming. The chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Opposed, nay. We are adjourned. Thank you. See you in April.